Beneath the sun-scorched cliffs of the Arizona Territory, 1875, a story of unexpected redemption unfolds. Sarah Mitchell, widowed by the harsh frontier 2 winters past, discovers a gravely wounded Apache warrior in her humble cabin. Defying the prejudices of her time, she chooses mercy over fear, tending to his injuries as autumn winds whisper through the canyon. But when word reaches the settlement, armed men gather with torches and rifles, their hearts hardened by years of bloodshed. In a moment that will forever alter their destinies, the warrior invokes an ancient custom, taking her as his bride to protect them both from the coming storm. What unfolds is a tale of 2 souls from vastly different worlds, learning that love can bridge the deepest divides. But can a marriage born of necessity truly blossom into something more? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special. For you, Sarah Mitchell's fingers traced the worn edges of her wedding quilt, each patch a memory stitched in faded calico and muslin. The morning sun streamed through her cabin's lone window, casting golden light across the carefully pieced squares. Here, a scrap from her mother's apron, there, a piece of Thomas's Sunday shirt. She'd sewn it during those long winter evenings, when hope still colored their dreams of a new life in the Arizona Territory. 2 years had passed since the fever took Thomas, leaving her alone with 40 acres of stubborn earth and a cabin that felt too big for one. The land demanded everything. Strength she didn't know she possessed, patience she'd learned to cultivate like the hardy vegetables in her garden, and a resolve as unyielding as the surrounding red rock cliffs. Each morning began the same way. Before dawn, she'd wake to tend the chickens, their soft clucking a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. The cow, Old Belle, needed milking, her warm flank a comfort in the cool morning air. Sarah had learned to appreciate these simple rhythms, finding solace in the routine that kept her hands busy and her mind from wandering too far into memories. Today, she worked methodically through her chores, pausing only to wipe sweat from her brow with the sleeve of her faded work dress. The October sun had yet to lose its summer ferocity, though the mornings carried hints of autumn's approach. Her father's gold pocket watch, the only luxury she permitted herself to carry while working, marked the passage of time with steady precision. Its weight in her pocket was a constant reminder of the civilized world she'd left behind in Boston. The settlers in the nearby town of Copper Springs regarded her with a mixture of pity and admiration. A woman alone on the frontier was an oddity, a source of gossip and speculation. Some, like Mrs. Henderson at the general store, made a point of offering help she didn't need. Others, particularly the unmarried men, made thinly veiled suggestions about the impossibility of managing a homestead without a husband. Sarah had learned to deflect both with quiet dignity. She paid her debts on time, attended church when weather permitted, and kept her own counsel. The independence she'd found in widowhood, though born of grief, had become precious to her. Even Thomas, God rest his soul, had never fully understood her deep connection to this wild country. She paused at the garden gate, surveying the rows of squash and corn she'd coaxed from the reluctant soil. The plants thrived despite the odds, much like herself. Beyond the fence, the desert stretched away in waves of sage and scattered juniper, rising eventually to meet the towering red cliffs that stood sentinel over her small domain. The land's harsh beauty had a way of making human concerns seem small and passing. Her nearest neighbor, Jim Hawkins, lived 3 miles to the east, close enough to assist if real trouble came, far enough to preserve the solitude she'd grown to cherish. He'd helped her put up hay last month, refusing payment except for a loaf of her sourdough bread. His kindness came without the usual hints about remarriage, for which she was grateful. The afternoon wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of creosote and coming rain. She needed to finish gathering the last of the late tomatoes before the storm hit. As she worked, her mind drifted to the letter she'd received yesterday from her sister in Boston, full of gentle urgings to come home and dire warnings about Indians and outlaws. But home wasn't a place she could return to. It was something she'd built here, stitch by stitch, season by season. A distant rumble of thunder drew her eyes to the western sky. Dark clouds gathered above the cliffs, promising the kind of violent storm that could reshape the landscape in hours. Sarah quickened her pace, filling her basket with the remaining ripe tomatoes. She'd learned to read the sky like a book, and this story spelled trouble. The first heavy drops began to fall as she latched the cabin door behind her. Inside, the familiar sense of wood smoke and fresh bread enveloped her. She'd spent the morning baking, preparing for the coming winter while summer's bounty was still available. Rows of preserved vegetables lined her rough-hewn shelves, their glass jars catching the last light of day. As the storm intensified, Sarah settled into her rocking chair, picking up the quilt she'd been working on. Unlike her wedding quilt, this one was meant for practical use, pieced together from worn clothing and feed sacks. Still, her stitches were small and even, a testament to the refinement she'd brought with her from the east. The rhythm of the needle rising and falling matched the steady drumming of rain on the roof, lulling her into a contemplative mood. She thought of Thomas then, allowing herself the luxury of remembrance. He would have been proud of how she'd managed, though he might not have recognized the woman she'd become, stronger, more certain of herself, as weathered and resilient as the land itself. The gold watch ticked softly in her pocket, marking time's passage in a world where past and present seemed to flow together like rain down the window panes. The storm raged through the night, its fury rattling the cabins, windows and drowning out all other sounds. It wasn't until the first wan light of dawn crept through the shutters that Sarah heard it, a different sound, something out of place, a scraping, followed by a dull thud from the lean-to where she stored firewood. Her father's revolver lay in the drawer beside her bed. Sarah's fingers closed around its familiar grip as she rose, her heart beating a harsh rhythm against her ribs. 2 winters alone had taught her caution. The lean-to door hung open, swinging gently in the morning breeze. Dark drops stained the weathered wood of the doorframe, not rain, but blood. Sarah's grip tightened on the revolver as she followed the trail of crimson droplets into the shadows. He lay crumpled between the woodpile and the wall, a bundle of dark clothes and darker blood, an Apache warrior, his black hair matted with rain and red earth. A crude bandage, fashioned from what looked like a torn shirt, wrapped his torso. The fabric was soaked through. Sarah's first instinct was to run, to bolt the door and ride for Jim Hawkins' place. Every story she'd heard since arriving in the territory, every warning about the Apache raids on isolated homesteads, screamed at her to flee. But something held her in place. Perhaps it was the way he lay there, utterly still except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Or maybe it was the memory of Thomas's words about showing Christian charity to all God's creatures. The warrior's eyes opened as she stood watching, dark eyes filled with pain and something else. Not fear, she realized, but a fierce determination to live. A leather medicine pouch hung around his neck, its beadwork intricate and meaningful, in ways she couldn't understand. "I mean you no harm," she said softly, though she kept the revolver ready. "You're hurt." He made no response except to press one hand against his wound, his face tightening with pain. Blood seeped between his fingers. Sarah made her decision then, though its consequences would echo through all the days to come. She lowered the revolver and stepped forward. "Let me help you." The warrior watched her approach, his gaze never leaving her face. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps Thomas's age when they'd married. His features held a noble cast, despite the pain that etched them. Getting him into the cabin was a struggle that left them both gasping. He tried to help, but his strength was failing. By the time she settled him on her bed, his skin burned with fever, and his eyes had taken on a glassy sheen. Sarah worked, quickly cutting away the makeshift bandage to reveal an ugly wound in his side. A bullet hole, she realized with a chill. The exit wound on his back was larger, angry-looking. Both needed cleaning and proper dressing. She used skills learned during Thomas's final illness, working methodically to clean the wounds with boiled water and what little carbolic acid remained in her medical kit. The warrior remained conscious throughout, watching her with those intense, dark eyes, but making no sound, despite what must have been considerable pain. When she finished, she offered him water from a clay cup. He drank cautiously, then touched the medicine pouch at his throat. His lips moved, forming words in his own. Language, a prayer perhaps, or a charm against evil. "Rest now," Sarah told him, though she knew he couldn't understand. "You're safe here." Even as she spoke the words, she wondered at their truth. If anyone from town discovered she was harboring an Apache warrior, particularly one with a bullet wound, there would be consequences, grave ones. She spent the morning watching him drift between consciousness and fevered dreams, catching fragments of words in his native tongue. Sometimes he would grow agitated, his hands moving as if to ward off unseen enemies. During these moments, she found herself speaking softly to him as she had to Thomas during his fever, meaningless words of comfort that seemed to calm him. The medicine pouch fascinated her. During his calmer moments, she studied its intricate beadwork, geometric patterns in blue and white that surely held meaning. Once, when his fever spiked particularly high, he clutched it and began a low, rhythmic chant that made the hair on her arms stand up. As morning stretched into afternoon, Sarah maintained her vigil, watching the rise and fall of his chest, changing the dressings when needed, and wondering what chain of events had brought this warrior to her door. The bullet wound suggested violence, perhaps a skirmish with settlers or cavalry. She'd heard rumors of increased tensions with the Apache bands that still resisted reservation life. Outside, the world continued its familiar rhythm. Chickens clucking in the yard, wind rustling through the cottonwoods. But inside the cabin, time seemed to stand still, measured only by the warrior's labored breathing and the steady ticking of her father's watch. By evening, the warrior's fever had broken. Sarah found him sitting upright in bed, his back straight, despite the pain it must have caused him. A carved bone whistle hung from a leather thong around his neck alongside the medicine pouch. She hadn't noticed it before in her focus on his wounds. "I'm Sarah," she said, touching her chest, then gesturing to him with an open palm. "And you?" He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Taze." His voice was deep, resonant with dignity despite its weakness. He touched the whistle at his neck, then made a flowing gesture with his hand. "Running water." The simple exchange shifted something between them. He was no longer just a wounded Apache, but a man with a name, an identity. Sarah found herself wondering about the meaning behind it, about the life he'd led before their paths crossed. Taze watched as she changed his bandages, his dark eyes alert now. The wound was healing clean, no sign of the infection she'd feared. His fingers brushed against hers as she worked, calloused and strong despite his weakened state. "Why?" he asked suddenly, the English word careful on his tongue. Sarah paused. Understanding his question went deeper than language could easily express. Why had she helped him? Why hadn't she fled or sent for the sheriff? She thought of Thomas. Again, of his gentle insistence that all life was sacred. "Because it was right," she said simply, knowing he might not understand the words, but hoping he'd grasp their meaning. A sound from outside froze them both. Hoofbeats approaching. Taze's hand moved to his side, where a knife would normally hang. Sarah pressed him back against the pillows and pressed her finger to her lips. Through the window, she saw Jim Hawkins riding up to her gate. Her heart thundered. Jim was a good man, but his brother had been killed in an Apache raid 3 years ago. He wouldn't understand. "Sarah?" Jim's voice carried clearly. "You all right after that storm?" She slipped outside, pulling the door firmly shut behind her. "I'm fine, Jim. Just some branches down." He sat easily in his saddle, scanning the yard with the habitual vigilance of a frontier settler. Heard tell of Apache signs near Copper Creek. "Thought I'd ride by, make sure you were safe." "That's kind of you." Sarah forced her voice to remain steady. "But I haven't seen anything unusual." Jim nodded, but his eyes lingered on the lean-to. "You need any help clearing those branches?" "No, thank you, I can manage." After he rode away, Sarah stood watching until his figure disappeared into the gathering dusk. When she returned inside, Tarzay was standing, one hand braced against the wall for support. "Dangerous," he said, his face grave. "For you." Sarah recognized more than the simple English word. He was offering her a chance to turn him out, to protect herself. The thought stirred something in her chest. "Sit," she said firmly, guiding him back to the bed. "You're not healed." That night, as moonlight spilled through the window, Tarzay told her what he could in his limited English, supplemented by gestures. He was a scout, he explained, touching the bone whistle. Something had gone wrong. Other Apache warriors dead or captured. Soldiers with guns. His hands mapped out the story his words couldn't fully tell. Sarah found herself sharing too, pointing to objects around the cabin and naming them in English. Tarzay repeated each word carefully, his accent making them sound new and strange. When she showed him Thomas's photograph, his expression softened with understanding. "Alone," he said, touching his chest, then hers. "Same." The simple observation startled her. She hadn't thought of them as sharing anything beyond this temporary sanctuary, but perhaps he was right. They were both solitary figures, separated from their people by circumstance and choice. As she prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans, Sarah realized the danger wasn't just to her. If Tarzay was a scout, the cavalry would be hunting him. Every hour he spent here put them both at greater risk. Yet watching him eat, seeing the quiet dignity with which he bore his pain, she couldn't bring herself to regret her choice. The bone whistle gleamed in the lamplight, a reminder that he too had a life, a story, a purpose beyond being simply the Apache warrior in her cabin. Dawn brought a shift in the autumn wind, carrying the scent of sage and coming frost. Sarah woke to find Tarzay already awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed, his hands working carefully with something. A clay water jar sat beside him, one he must have fashioned during the night from clay she kept for sealing the chimney. His fingers moved with practiced skill, smoothing the surface with a polished stone. Intricate patterns emerged under his touch, zigzag lines that spoke of rain, spiral whirls suggesting wind. Sarah watched from her pallet by the fireplace, struck by the quiet concentration in his face. "For you," he said, noticing her gaze. "Apache way, give thanks." The simple gesture touched her deeply. She'd given him shelter, yes, but he was offering something equally precious, a piece of his culture, his way of life. Over breakfast, Tarzay taught her the Apache words for the food they shared. "Be he said, pointing to the deer meat. "She'd stewed. Nadach for corn." His voice took on a musical quality when speaking his native tongue, rich with meanings she could only guess at. Sarah found herself sharing too. She showed him how she preserved vegetables for winter, explaining the process with gestures when words failed. Tarzay nodded with understanding, then described how his people dried meat and wild berries for the cold months. His wound was healing well, the angry red fading to pink. As she changed the bandage, he told her about Apache medicine, herbs that could ease pain, stop bleeding, fight fever. She recognized some from her own garden, though she'd never known their healing properties. "Show me," she said, bringing him sprigs of plants she'd gathered. Tarzay handled each one carefully, explaining their uses through a mixture of English, words, and graceful hand gestures. Sarah began keeping notes in her journal, drawing the plants and writing their Apache names phonetically alongside their English ones. The clay water jar dried slowly by the fire, its patterns growing more distinct. Tarzay explained each one, teaching her to read the story written in clay. The spiral at the center represented life's journey, he told her. The zigzag lines were the paths we walk, sometimes smooth, sometimes difficult. As morning stretched into afternoon, Sarah found herself sharing stories of Boston, of the life she'd left behind. Tarzay listened intently, his dark eyes thoughtful. When she described the ocean, he compared it to the endless waves of desert grass in spring. "Different," he said, touching the jar's spiraling pattern, "but same, all connected." Their words flowed more easily now, a blend of English, Apache, and the wordless understanding that had grown between them. Sarah learned that Tarzay had been trained from childhood as a scout, reading the land's smallest signs. The bone whistle he carried could mimic bird calls, warning his people of danger. In turn, she taught him to read simple English words, writing them in the dust on the cabin floor. Tarzay traced the letters carefully, his warrior's hands gentle with this new skill. When he wrote her name, the letters looked strange and beautiful, like some ancient inscription. They shared the evening meal in comfortable silence, the clay jar standing sentinel on her rough-hewn table. Outside, a mockingbird sang its complex song, and Tarzay used his whistle to answer it, making Sarah smile. But even in these peaceful moments, reality pressed in. Twice that day, they'd heard horses on the distant trail. Each time, Tarzay had moved silently to the back room, while Sarah's heart hammered with fear of discovery. As night fell, she found him standing at the window, his face troubled in the fading light. He touched the healing wound in his side, then looked at her with an expression that held both gratitude and warning. "Your people," he said softly, "will not understand." Sarah thought of Jim Hawkins's suspicious glance, of the stories whispered in town about Apache raids. She thought of her sister's letters warning of savages, and of the simple clay jar that told stories of life's connected paths. "Some things," she replied, "are worth understanding." Tarzay's smile was brief but warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. He touched the jar's spiral pattern once more, then the spot over his heart. The gesture needed no translation. That night, as moonlight painted silver patterns on the cabin walls, Sarah lay awake, listening to Tarzay's quiet breathing from the other room. The clay jar caught the moonlight, its shadows telling stories on her wall. She thought about paths, crossing in the desert, about the strange ways fate worked its will, and about how understanding could grow like a desert flower after rain, slowly but with stubborn determination. The sheriff's badge caught the morning light as Marshal Wade Jenkins dismounted at Sarah's gate. She'd been expecting this visit since hearing the drum of hoofbeats approaching, had seen the dust of multiple riders on the trail. Now, watching through her window, she counted 5 men with him, all armed, all wearing expressions that made her blood run cold. Inside, Tarzay had already melted into the root cellar beneath the floorboards, a hiding place they'd prepared 3 days ago when rumors first reached them of cavalry patrols in the area. Sarah smoothed her apron, touched her father's watch for courage, and stepped out onto her porch. "Morning, Ms. Mitchell," Jenkins said, his tone carefully neutral. The badge on his chest seemed to mock the courtesy in his voice. "Mind if we have a word?" "Of course not, Marshal." She kept her voice steady, though her heart thundered against her ribs. "Would you care for coffee? This ain't a social call." He removed his hat, revealing gray hair and hard eyes. "Got reports of Apache signs in the area, blood trails specifically, leading this direction." Sarah felt the weight of all their stares. These were men she knew, Jim Hawkins among them, looking uncomfortable but determined, men who'd helped her with her fence, bought her eggs, tipped their hats to her in town. "I haven't seen anything unusual," she said, "though I've been busy with the harvest. Mind if we look around?" Jenkins didn't wait for an answer, already gesturing to his men. "Won't take but a minute." They searched methodically, checking the barn, the lean-to, the root cellar door that lay hidden under a rug. Sarah stood on her porch, hands clasped, to keep them from shaking, watching as they invaded her carefully ordered world. "Found something, Marshal?" One of the deputies emerged from the lean-to, holding up a scrap of bloodied cloth, the bandage she'd first found Tarzay wearing. She'd thought she'd burned it all. Jenkins turned to her, his hand resting casually on his gun. "Want to explain this, Ms. Mitchell?" "I used it last week when I cut myself cleaning fish," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. "I meant to burn it." "Funny." Jenkins stepped closer. "Looks like a mite lot of blood for a fish-cleaning accident." A sudden bird call split the air, a desert thrush, but not quite right. Sarah's heart stopped. Tarzay's whistle. Had one of the men found him? But no, it was a warning. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of dust on the far horizon. Riders coming, many riders. "Cavalry patrols heading this way," Jim Hawkins said, shading his eyes. "Maybe they found something." Jenkins studied Sarah's face. "You've been out here alone too long, Ms. Mitchell. It ain't safe. Why don't you come into town for a spell? Stay with the Henderson family until we sort this out." The offer held both threat and genuine concern. Sarah thought of the clay water jar hidden in her cellar, of the quiet conversations shared over healing wounds and cultural boundaries. "Thank you, Marshal, but I have livestock to tend. I can't leave. Then we'll post a guard for your protection." His tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "Jim, you take first watch. The rest of us will meet that patrol, see what they've found." The cavalry patrol brought more than news. They brought certainty of Apache raiders in the area, stories of attacks on isolated homesteads further south. Their young lieutenant, fresh from West Point with a shining sword and harder eyes than his years warranted, spoke of tracking a particular warrior. "A scout," he said, his voice carrying to where Sarah stood. "Wounded in our last encounter, dangerous one, trained by the old chiefs before they were moved to the reservation. He'll have sought shelter somewhere." Sarah felt Jim Hawkins' eyes on her, saw the moment when suspicion became certainty in his face, but he said nothing, not yet. The weight of his silence pressed against her like a physical thing. The day stretched endlessly. Sarah went about her chores under Jim's watchful gaze, feeling the moments tick away like hammer blows. When darkness finally fell, he built a fire near her gate, a signal and a warning both. Inside, after making sure all windows were shuttered, she lifted the rug and opened the cellar door. Tarzay emerged like a shadow, his movements stiff from hours of hiding. "They know," he said simply, touching his bone whistle. "Must go. They're watching the house. I know way." He moved to the window, peered through a crack in the shutters. "But you, not safe now. They suspect." Sarah knew he was right. She'd seen it in Jenkins' eyes, in Jim's troubled silence. Once they found evidence of Apache presence, questions would become accusations. A woman alone, harboring an enemy, the very thought would spark dangerous rumors. Tarzay turned to her, his face grave in the lamplight. "I not leave you to face this alone." He touched the clay jar, then her hand. "There is way, old way, but must choose quickly." Through the cabin's shuttered windows, the glow of Jim. Hawkins' fire cast restless shadows. Sarah stood frozen, processing Tarzay's words. The old way. He reached for his medicine pouch, withdrawing a folded piece of wool, a wedding blanket, she realized, its intricate patterns barely visible in the dim lamplight. The fabric held the rich scent of cedar and sage. "Among my people," he said, in carefully, each English word chosen with deliberation. "When man and woman share roof, share bread, they must be bound by sacred ways." He spread the blanket between them. "If you accept, none can separate us. Not your law, not my people's." "Law?" Sarah's hand trembled as she touched the blanket's worn edge. "You're asking me to marry you?" "To protect both," he said. "But also," he paused, searching for words. "Heart speaks true thing. These days here, I see you, strong like mountain, gentle like spring rain. My people would say, your spirit walks in beauty." Outside, a coyote called, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the choice before her. Sarah thought of Boston, of her sister's letters, of the life she'd once imagined for herself. Then she thought of the clay water jar, of shared languages and quiet understandings. "If I say yes," she whispered, "what then?" "We go to my people, make peace between worlds." His dark eyes held hers. "Not easy path, but walk together." A shout from outside interrupted them, Jim's voice raised in greeting. More riders approaching. Tarzay moved to the window. "Marshal returns. Must choose now." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the rough wool of the wedding blanket under her fingers. She thought of Thomas, of the life they'd planned, of all the turns that had led her to this moment. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. Yes. The ceremony was simple, conducted in whispers by lamplight. Taze wrapped the blanket around them both, speaking soft words in Apache, a prayer she understood, though the words were foreign. He took her hands in his, their fingers intertwining. "Under stars," he translated, "under sun, two paths. Join, two hearts beat as one. What Creator has bound, no man can break." Sarah felt the weight of generations in those words, the ancient power of vows spoken in darkness. "What Creator has bound," she repeated, "no man can break." They sealed their union with a drink from the clay water jar, now holding a mixture of water from both their traditions, her well water and the rain he'd gathered. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. Boots sounded on her porch steps. "Miss Mitchell," Marshal Jenkins' voice, "need to speak with you." Taze's hand tightened on hers. The moment of truth. Sarah squared her shoulders and opened the door. Jenkins stood there, flanked by deputies, his face dark with suspicion. The words she spoke next would change everything. "Marshal," she said clearly, "I'd like you to meet my husband." The silence that followed was absolute. Jenkins' hand moved to his gun, but Sarah stepped forward, placing herself between the weapons and Taze. "We were married by Apache custom," she continued. "Legal and binding. You can check your law books, Marshal. Traditional tribal marriages are recognized in the territory. This true?" Jenkins directed the question at Jim Hawkins, who had joined them on the porch. Jim studied them for a long moment. Sarah's straight spine, Taze's protective stance, the wedding blanket around their shoulders. "Law's the law, Marshal," he said finally. "Even out here." Jenkins wasn't finished. "He's wanted for questioning. Raids on—" "My husband," Sarah interrupted, "is a scout. Any raids you're investigating happened while he was here, healing from wounds taken in service to his people. I can testify to that in any court." The marshal's face worked through several emotions. "This won't sit well with folks in town." "Then it's fortunate," Sarah replied, her voice steady, "that I've never lived my life to suit the town's expectations." Dawn was breaking by the time the last rider left, their dust settling on the sage. Sarah and Taze stood in their doorway, the wedding blanket still around their shoulders, watching the sun paint the cliffs gold. "Brave woman," Taze said softly. Sarah leaned against him, feeling the strength in his frame, the steady beat of his heart. "Brave together," she corrected. "What Creator has bound, no man can break," he finished, and they watched the new day dawn on their joined path. Sarah's silver hair comb, her mother's wedding gift, caught the morning light as she worked it through her long brown hair. In the mirror's worn surface, she caught Taze watching her, his dark eyes thoughtful. A week had passed since their midnight ceremony, each day bringing new discoveries about the life they'd chosen. "Different," he said, touching the combs. "Delicate pattern. Like you, but beautiful." She smiled, remembering how her mother had pressed the comb into her hands before her first wedding. In Boston, brides wear their finest jewels to show their worth. "Apache women too," he touched the turquoise beads at his throat, "show strength of family, honor of name." Their mornings had fallen into a rhythm, shared tasks done in companionable silence or soft conversation. Taze proved skilled at many things she'd struggled with alone. He mended her fence with techniques that would outlast winter storms, showed her how to predict weather from the way hawks rode thermal currents. But it was the quieter moments that revealed most about her new husband. She discovered he had a gift for storytelling, his limited English enriched by expressive gestures and a voice that could paint pictures in the air. In the evenings, he shared tales of his people, of mountain spirits and clever coyote, of warriors and wise women who had shaped Apache ways. The town's reaction to their marriage manifested in small ways at first. The general store clerk's tight-lipped silence when she made her weekly supply run, whispers that stopped when she passed, women crossing the street to avoid speaking to her. "Mrs. Henderson says she's praying for my soul," Sarah told Taze one evening, trying to make light of it. His face darkened. "They fear what they not understand." "They fear you," she corrected gently. "No," he touched her cheek. "Fear you. Strong woman who chooses own path, more dangerous than any warrior." He was right, she realized. Her defiance, of social conventions threatened them more than Tarzay's presence. A woman making her own choices, bridging worlds they thought forever separated. It challenged everything they believed about the natural order. The Apache response came in the form of visitors. 3 riders appeared at sunset, their faces painted for diplomatic missions. Tarzay greeted them with formal dignity, speaking rapidly in their shared language. Sarah served coffee, catching fragments she recognized, words for peace, respect, new path. Later, Tarzay explained, "They come from my band. Want to know if marriage is true thing, not just for escape." "What did you tell them?" He smiled, touching the clay water jar they'd shared at their wedding. "Told them about woman who heals enemy, who sees with heart, not fear, who chooses love over easy path." The visitors returned the next day with gifts, a finely woven basket, herbs for healing, and most surprisingly, an invitation. The band's elder women wished to meet the white woman who had married their warrior. Sarah found herself preparing for this meeting with more nervousness than she'd felt facing Marshall Jenkins. She held the silver comb, wondering if she should wear it. "Wear," Tarzay encouraged. "Show who you are. No hide, no pretend." The meeting took place at the edge of her property, where desert gave way to rocky foothills. 5 Apache women waited. There, their faces weathered by sun and time, their eyes sharp with assessment. The oldest stepped forward, speaking words Tarzay translated. "She says you have chosen hard path. Many will hate, not understand. But those who walk in beauty must be strong." The woman held out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside lay a pair of beaded moccasins, sized for Sarah's feet. The gesture's meaning was clear. She would walk this path in both worlds. That evening, as shadows lengthened across their cabin floor, Sarah placed her silver comb beside Tarzay's bone whistle on the shelf. They now shared. The objects seemed to speak to each other, telling a story of worlds meeting, changing, creating something new. "Your people," she said carefully in Apache, using words he'd taught her. "They accept?" "Accept change coming," he replied in English. "Like spring flood, cannot stop, can only learn new way to walk with it." Sarah touched the moccasins, feeling the love sewn into every bead. "New way," she agreed. Together, dawn found them in Sarah's garden, where autumn's chill had begun to paint the squash leaves with frost. Tarzay knelt beside her, his strong hands working the soil as she recorded his teachings in a leather-bound notebook she'd begun keeping. "This one," he said, holding up a scraggly plant she'd always considered a weed, "makes tea for fever." His fingers demonstrated how to strip the leaves properly, but only young leaves, when moon is full. Sarah sketched the plant carefully, noting its characteristics. Beside her drawing she wrote both names, the Apache word Tarzay had taught her, and desert sage in English. Her notebook was filling with such entries, becoming a bridge between their worlds. "Your garden," Tarzay observed, "grows like white man's rose, straight lines." He gestured to show how the Apache planted in circles and natural groupings, each plant supporting its neighbors. Land knows better way than straight line. Together, they began transforming her orderly garden. Tarzay showed her how corn, beans, and squash could grow together, the corn providing stakes for the beans, while squash leaves shaded the soil. Sarah contributed her knowledge of crop rotation and soil enrichment, learned from farming magazines she'd saved. "See?" Tarzay smiled as they worked. 2 ways, make better way. Their learning flowed both directions. Sarah taught him to read. From her Bible, watching his finger trace the letters as he sounded out words. Tarzay was a quick study, soon reading simple passages aloud. He was particularly drawn to the Psalms, saying they reminded him of Apache prayer songs. In return, he taught her to read the desert itself. Every morning, they walked the boundaries of her property, their property now, as he showed her. Signs she'd never noticed. A disturbed pebble meant rabbits had passed. A certain bird's call warned of approaching riders. "Land speaks always," he explained. "Must learn listen." Sarah's notebook grew thick with this new knowledge. She documented how to find water by watching the flight of doves, which plants indicated underground springs, how to predict storms by the smell of creosote bush after dawn. One morning, Taze led her to a shallow cave in the nearby cliffs. Inside, ancient paintings depicted hunts and ceremonies, spirits and stories. He touched the red ochre figures with reverence. "My people not first here," he said. "Land remembers all who pass, all add to story." Sarah ran her fingers over the ancient artwork, feeling the texture of history beneath them. "Like my notebook," she said, "recording knowledge so it's not lost." "Yes." His smile was proud. "You understand." Their days fell into a pattern of shared learning. Sarah showed him how to preserve vegetables in glass jars, a technique that fascinated him. He taught her to make soap from yucca root, to weave baskets so tight they could carry water. The garden flourished under their combined care. Apache medicinal herbs grew alongside Sarah's European flowers. Desert plants, she'd once dismissed as useless, revealed their secrets under Taze's tutelage. Each plant had its purpose, its story, its medicine. One afternoon, treating a burn on his hand from the forge, where he'd been repairing her tools, Sarah realized how much her healing knowledge had expanded. She reached automatically for the right herbs, preparing them the way he'd shown her while reciting the prayer song that should accompany such work. Taze watched her with soft eyes. "You become like medicine, woman," he said. "Heart open to old ways, hands know new ways." "I had a good teacher," she replied in Apache, her accent making him smile. That evening, as they sat before their fire, Sarah looked through her notebook. Pages of sketches and notes documented their shared journey, English words beside Apache, and white man's farming techniques intertwined with indigenous wisdom, Christian prayers alongside native healing songs. "This," she said, touching the filled pages, "is our story now. Not just mine or yours, but something new." Taze nodded, adding another herb to the tea he was brewing. "Like land," he said, "always changing, always remembering, old and new. Danced together like wind and flame." They drank their tea in comfortable silence, watching shadows dance on walls that had witnessed so much change. Outside, a cool wind carried the scent of coming winter, of sage and pine, of two worlds meeting in the desert night. The cavalry officer's letter arrived on a bitter wind, carried by a dust-covered courier who wouldn't meet Sarah's eyes. The paper was thick, official, bearing the army's seal. She recognized the handwriting. Lieutenant Barrett, the young West Point graduate who'd searched her property that fateful night. To Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, it began formally, ignoring her Apache marriage name. "It has come to our attention that you are harboring a person of interest in our ongoing investigation of recent hostilities. While we respect the territorial laws regarding tribal marriages, we must insist upon interviewing your husband regarding his knowledge of certain events preceding your union." Taze read the letter slowly, his English reading skills now strong enough to understand its threat. His face remained impassive, but Sarah saw his hand stray to the bone whistle at his neck. "They not want talk," he said finally. "Want make example. Show Apache law means nothing against white man's law." Sarah took the letter from his hands, read it again. "They can't simply ignore our marriage. Even Marshal Jenkins acknowledged Marshal follows territory law. Army follows different law." Taze moved to the window, scanning the horizon with the instincts of a lifetime scout. "War chief in Washington sends orders, says all Apache must live on reservation now. No more free bands." The implications settled heavily between them. Their home, their garden, their carefully built life together. All of it threatened by policies made thousands of miles away by men who'd never seen the desert's face. A rider appeared on the trail, Jim Hawkins, moving fast. Sarah had barely opened the door when he dismounted. "Army patrols," he said without preamble. "2 units moving up from Fort Bowie. They're not just looking for talk." Taze nodded, as if this confirmed something. "How many rifles?" "Full complement." "And," Jim hesitated, "they've got Apache scouts with them. Reservation men." Sarah felt her heart constrict. Apache scouts were legendary trackers, men who used their traditional skills in service of the army. If they were involved, simple evasion wouldn't be enough. "Time to go," Tarzay said quietly. "Too many signs say storm coming." Jim pulled a folded paper from his vest. "Came by wire to the telegraph office. Armies declaring martial law in the territory starting next week. Any Apache found off reservation lands." He didn't need to finish. Sarah moved with sudden purpose, gathering their essential items. Her notebook of shared knowledge, medicines, the clay water jar, Thomas's watch, her silver comb. Each object a piece of their joined lives. "You'll need supplies," Jim said. "I can bring—" "No," Tarzay's voice was firm. "You risk too much already. Army suspects those who help Apache." "You saved my boy last winter," Jim replied. "That fever would have taken him if not for your medicine. Some debts matter more than law." While the men talked, Sarah added one more item to their pack, her Bible, its pages now marked with pressed herbs and Apache translations in the margins. Their shared teachings, written in both languages. A distant dust cloud on the horizon hastened their preparations. Jim's horse carried news to the Apache camp, where Tarzay's people waited, while they gathered what they could carry. "Sarah," Tarzay touched her arm as she packed. "Path ahead not easy, must leave much behind." She looked around their cabin, at the garden visible through the window, the shelves they'd built together, all the small comforts of the life they'd made. "Things are just things," she said in Apache. "Home is where we make it." His smile was proud, though touched with sadness. "You learn well, wife." The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Sarah took one last look at her former life, then shouldered her pack. The weight of the clay water jar pressed against her back, solid as their commitment to each other. "Which way?" she asked. Tarzay pointed toward the red cliffs. "Old paths. Apache ways." He touched the bone whistle. "High country welcomes those who know its voice." They slipped away as the sun began to set, leaving the cabin to whatever fate awaited it. Behind them, dust clouds marked the approach of the army patrol. Ahead, the ancient cliffs held secrets known only to those who had learned to read the desert's face. Sarah's moccasins, gifts from the Apache women, moved silently over the rocky ground. Each step took them further from the world of written laws and deeper into older ways of knowing. The clay water jar clinked softly against her back, carrying water from both their traditions into whatever future awaited. Sarah's first pair of moccasins had begun to show wear, the beadwork dulled by miles of desert travel. 3 weeks had passed since they'd left the cabin, moving through landscapes she'd never imagined existed in the territory she thought she knew. Tarzay led them along ancient paths, following routes known only to his people. They traveled mainly at night, when the desert air cooled and the stars provided guidance. During the day, they sheltered in caves or beneath rock overhangs, where Tarzay taught her to move without leaving traces. "Walk like deer," he would say, demonstrating how to place each foot. Light touch, always ready to change path. Her body was changing, growing leaner and stronger. Muscles she never knew she had ached, then hardened. Her skin darkened under the desert sun, and her hands grew calloused in new places. But it was her mind that changed most profoundly. "Listen," Tarzay would whisper, and gradually she learned to hear what he heard, the difference between a wind-rustled bush and a small animal's passage, the warning in a bird's sudden silence, the promise of water in the dawn air. They avoided the army patrols with a combination of Tarzay's scoutcraft and information from other Apache bands they encountered. These meetings were brief but revealing. Sarah watched how her husband's demeanor shifted, becoming more formal, speaking with the gravity of a leader. "Your man," an elder woman told her during one such meeting, "is son of great chief, could have been war leader but chose scout's path, chose to build bridges, not burn them." Sarah absorbed this new knowledge about her husband, understanding better now his skill at navigating between worlds. That night, as they made camp in a hidden canyon, she asked him about it. "Father was great man," he said simply, "taught me strength not always in fighting, sometimes in finding new way." He touched her cheek gently. "Like you show me." There, Physical intimacy had grown alongside their shared trials. The first time they'd made love was beneath desert stars, their union blessed by ancient winds and witnessed by eternal cliffs. Sarah discovered that Tarzay's strength could be infinitely gentle, and that love needed no common language to speak its truth. Survival taught them to rely on each other absolutely. When a flash flood threatened their camp, Tarzay's quick action saved their supplies. When he fell ill from a poisonous plant, Sarah's combined knowledge of Western medicine and Apache herbs brought him through the fever. The clay water jar survived their journey, carefully wrapped in the wedding blanket. Each time they filled it from a hidden spring, Sarah remembered their ceremony, their shared drink that had sealed their vows. The water always tasted sweeter for those memories. One morning, high in the mountains where pine trees grew alongside barrel cactus, Tarzay pointed to distant peaks still touched with snow. "My people's summer camp's there. Safe place. Army horses can't climb those trails." Sarah looked at the rugged landscape, seeing it through new eyes. What had once seemed a barren wilderness now revealed itself as a homeland rich with resources and meaning. She could identify plants that offered food, medicine, and tools. She read stories in rock formations and weather patterns. "Will your people accept me?" she asked in Apache, her grammar careful. Tarzay smiled at her improving language. "They accept strength," he replied. "Accept wisdom." He touched her notebook, where she still recorded their shared knowledge. "Accept one who learns old ways, while bringing new thinking." That evening, as they prepared their camp, Sarah found herself singing an Apache melody while using techniques she'd learned in Boston to prepare their food. Tarzay joined her song, their voices blending in the desert twilight. "Two rivers join," he said later, holding her close as the first stars appeared. "Make new river stronger than each alone." Sarah touched her moccasins, thinking of the path that had brought her here. The beadwork caught starlight like memories. "When I left Boston," she said, "I thought I was leaving civilization for the wilderness. Now I understand civilization is what we carry in our hearts." Tarzay nodded. "And what we choose to learn from each other." He pointed to the stars. "Those lights, your people navigate by them one way, my people another way. Both find true path." Their camp that night, like their love, was a blend of both worlds. Apache wisdom in the placement and concealment, Sarah's practical touches in the organization. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the boundaries men drew on maps below. The warrior's shield caught the firelight, its surface decorated with symbols of power, eagle feathers, lightning bolts, and the personal medicine signs of Tarzay's lineage. The tribal elder held it before him like a mirror of judgment, its ancient surface reflecting the faces of those gathered in the council circle. "Son of Black Horse," the elder spoke in Apache, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "You bring a white woman to our secret places. Explain why we should not see this as betrayal." Sarah sat beside Tarzay, her back straight despite her exhaustion from their journey. She understood enough Apache now to follow the proceedings, though the formal language was more complex than what she and Tarzay shared. "I bring my wife," Tarzay replied, his voice steady, "one who has proven herself worthy of our ways, who healed me when others would have left me to die, who walks in beauty upon the sacred land." The shield passed from hand to hand among the council members. Sarah recognized many of the faces from Tarzay's descriptions during their journey. Cloudmaker, the medicine man who had trained him as a youth, Running Deer, the war chief who had made him a scout, Grey Mountain Woman, keeper of the tribe's oldest stories. "A white woman cannot understand our ways," Running Deer challenged. "Their hearts are hard like their stone houses, yet she learns." This from Grey Mountain Woman, who studied Sarah with sharp eyes. "I see Apache medicine in her bag mixed with white medicine. I see moccasins worn with many miles. I see one who chooses to walk away from her people's power." The shield came to rest before Sarah. In its weathered surface, she saw her own reflection. Sun-darkened skin, hair tied back with Apache bands, clothes that blended both worlds. But it was her eyes that held her attention, showing a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Speak," Grey Mountain Woman commanded in English. "Tell us why you come." Sarah rose, conscious of every eye upon her. She spoke in Apache, her words carefully chosen. "I come because love knows no boundaries, because wisdom can flow both ways, like water joining from different springs." She touched the clay water jar at her feet. "I come to learn, to share, to build bridges between worlds." A murmur ran through the assembly. Her use of their language, while imperfect, demonstrated respect and commitment. Cloudmaker leaned forward, interested. "You know our medicine ways?" Sarah opened her notebook, showing the careful drawings and dual-language descriptions. "Taze teaches me. I add knowledge from my people's healing. Together we find new ways to help others." The medicine man examined her notes, his expression thoughtful. "This is good medicine. Two kinds of knowing made stronger together." But Running Deer wasn't finished. He lifted the warrior's shield again, this time directing his words to Taze. "You are son of Black Horse, greatest of our chiefs before the white man's treaties. Your father died refusing to be caged on their reservation. Now you bring one of them to us?" Taze stood, his presence commanding respect. "My father taught me that true strength lies not in refusing to change, but in changing without losing who we are." He took Sarah's hand. "In her I found one who understands this truth, who helps me walk between worlds without losing my way." Grey Mountain Woman lifted her ancient face to the stars. "The old stories speak of times of great change, when the people must find new paths or perish. Perhaps this is such a time." She fixed her gaze on Sarah. "But proof must be given. Words are easy as wind. Actions speak truth." "A test," Running Deer declared, lifting the shield. "Let her prove her worth by our ways." Cloudmaker raised his hand. 3 days, 3 trials. If she shows the heart of Apache woman, we will accept this union." Sarah felt Taze tense beside her, but she squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I accept," she said in clear Apache. The shield passed to her hands. Its surface was warm, alive with stories she was only beginning to understand, but as she held it, she felt a connection to this place, these people, and the ancient wisdom they carried. "Tomorrow at dawn," Grey Mountain Woman announced. "Until then, rest. You will need your strength." Later, in the shelter of their private lodge, Taze held her close. "The trials will not be easy." "Neither was leaving everything I knew," Sarah replied. "Neither was falling in love across boundaries. Neither was learning to see the world through new eyes." She touched the shield, which they had been instructed to keep until the trials were complete. "I'm ready." The hybrid garden sprouted in rocky soil, defying both nature and tradition. Sarah's hands moved steadily through the earth, combining what she'd learned from both worlds. Apache planting methods, the 3 sisters of corn, beans, and squash growing in spiral patterns, merged with European techniques of composting and soil preparation. This was her first trial, to create life from the harshest ground the elders could find, proving she understood both the practical and spiritual aspects of working with the land. Grey Mountain Woman watched from nearby, her ancient eyes missing nothing. "Why you plant in spiral?" she asked in English, testing. "The spiral is life's pattern," Sarah answered in Apache, continuing to work. "From the smallest shell to the stars above. When we plant in straight lines, we fight nature's way." She touched a corn sprout gently. "But the spiral lets each plant support the others, like family." The old woman's weathered face creased in a slight smile. "You learn well, but plants need water. No rain comes." Sarah nodded toward the clay water jar, nestled in the shade. "Water from my old home, mixed with water from the sacred spring." 2 strengths joined. She had been carefully rationing this mixture, using it to give life to her garden. The second trial came at dusk. Cloudmaker presented her with 3 sick children from the camp, their small bodies burning with fever. "Heal them," he commanded, "by whatever medicine you know." Sarah opened her notebook, now worn with use and learning. In it, she had documented both Apache remedies and her Western medical knowledge. For the first child, she used willow bark tea, an ancient treatment known to both peoples. For the second, she combined an Apache fever remedy with cool compresses learned from her Boston doctor. The third required all her knowledge. Western diagnosis identifying the illness, Apache. Medicine providing the cure. Through the night she worked, Taze beside her, grinding herbs and heating water. As dawn broke, the children's fevers broke too. Cloudmaker touched each small forehead and nodded slowly. The final trial was the hardest. Running Deer led her to a high cliff where ancient pictographs told stories of the people. "Read the signs," he challenged. "Tell us our own story." Sarah's heart pounded. She had learned much from Taze about reading the old ways, but this was different. One mistake in interpreting sacred history could undo everything. She studied the red ochre figures carefully, remembering all she had learned. "This tells of the time of emergence," she began slowly in Apache, "when the people came up from the lower worlds." Her finger traced the spiral pattern. "Each circle shows a different world, each teaching its own wisdom." She continued through the story, weaving together what Tazai had taught her with her own understanding of how peoples preserve their crucial memories. When she reached the modern figures, she paused. "These show change coming," she said softly, "but change has always been part of the story. Each emergence brought new ways of living. The people survived by learning, adapting, keeping what was sacred while growing stronger." Running Deer's face remained impassive, but Grey Mountain Woman, who had silently joined them, spoke. "And what do you see for the future?" Sarah touched the last pictograph, a complex spiral of interconnected figures. "I see what we build. Together, knowledge shared, not lost. Strength in unity, not division. Like my garden below, old ways and new ways growing together, feeding each other." As the sun set on the third day, the council gathered again. The warrior's shield passed from hand to hand as each elder spoke their judgment. Cloudmaker praised her healing wisdom. Grey Mountain Woman spoke of her respect for traditions. Even Running Deer acknowledged her strength. "You have proven yourself," Grey Mountain Woman finally declared, "not by becoming Apache, but by showing how two worlds can join without either being lost." Sarah felt Taze's hand grasp hers as the shield was presented to them both. "This shield," the old woman continued, "bears the medicine signs of Black Horse's line. Now it will carry a new story of his son who had the courage to build bridges and the woman who helped him show us a new way to remain true to the old ways." That night in their lodge, Sarah and Taze added their own marks to the shield's ancient surface, a spiral made of two intertwining paths, flowing together like rivers joining to form something greater than either alone. The broken peace pipe lay in pieces on the council lodge floor, its sacred surface scarred by deliberate force. Sarah stared at the fragments, each one reflecting the firelight like drops of blood. Behind her she heard the angry murmur of the gathered tribe. The messenger, a young Apache runner from a neighboring band, had arrived at dusk, his horse lathered from hard riding. The news he brought shattered their fragile peace. Marshal Jenkins had been replaced by a new lawman, one who didn't honor the old agreements. More importantly, someone from Copper Springs had revealed the location of their mountain sanctuary to the army. "Who?" Taze asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Which of our friends became enemy?" The runner's eyes fell on Sarah. "The storewoman, Henderson. She followed Trader's wagon, learned the secret trails, told soldiers she did Christian duty, saving white woman from savages." Sarah felt the words like physical blows. Mrs. Henderson had been kind to her once, in her own rigid way, had even slipped extra coffee into her weekly orders, worried about the widow living alone. "She thinks she's saving me," Sarah said softly, the bitterness of betrayal sharp in her throat. Running Deer lifted the pieces of the broken pipe. "This is what white man's friendship worth. Even those who smile hide snake's heart." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "Jim Hawkins remains true. Others too. This is one woman's fear, not all people's hatred." But the damage was done. The army would be moving soon, their blue-coated columns advancing into the mountains, with Mrs. Henderson's information guiding them. The sanctuary they'd built, the hybrid garden just beginning to flourish, the peace they'd crafted between worlds, all threatened by one person's misguided righteousness. Cloudmaker spoke from the shadows. The signs warned of this. Snake. In summer grass, scorpion under peaceful stone. He looked at Tarzay. What does Son of Black Horse say? Sarah watched her husband's face, seeing the weight of leadership settle on his shoulders. He had worked so hard to build bridges between the worlds, to show that change didn't mean surrender. Now those bridges were burning. "We move," Tarzay said finally. "Not run, choose our ground. There are higher places, older trails." He touched the warrior's shield that now bore their shared markings. "My father fought and died. I choose different path. We survive by being stronger than hate, wiser than fear." Grey Mountain Woman's voice rose from her place by the fire. "And your woman, this betrayal comes from her people. My people are here," Sarah replied in Apache, her voice carrying to all corners of the lodge. "I made my choice when I first healed a wounded warrior, when I took the marriage vows, when I passed the trials." She lifted her medicine bag, which contained healing wisdom from both worlds. "I cannot unmake that choice, even if I wanted to." Tarzay moved to her side, his strength flowing into her. "We go together. Find new place. Build new ways. Show that betrayal can't break what Creator has bound." The council debated through the night. Sarah and Tarzay packed their essential items, medicines, seeds from their garden, the clay water jar that had traveled so far with them, the broken peace pipe they left where it lay, a reminder of promises made and broken. As dawn approached, Jim Hawkins himself arrived, having ridden through the night on secret paths. His news confirmed their fears. 3 cavalry companies were already moving into position, with Apache scouts from the reservation leading them. "Mrs. Henderson," he said, the name tasting sour. "She thinks she's doing God's work." "Saving your soul, Sarah." He spat into the dust. "Some souls don't need saving. They just need to be left in peace to find their own path to heaven." Sarah touched the warrior's shield, feeling the raised pattern of their shared spiral. "Peace was never going to be easy," she said, "but that doesn't make it wrong." Tarzay nodded, his face grave in the pre-dawn light. "Not wrong, just harder trail to walk." He touched the bone whistle at his neck. "Time to walk it again." A single eagle feather drifted down from the cliffs above, landing at Sarah's feet. As they pushed deeper into the shadow-filled canyon, she picked it up, feeling its smooth strength. Tarzay had taught her that eagles were messengers of courage, their feathers carrying power for those brave enough to walk difficult paths. They called this place the Valley of Shadows, a narrow passage through towering cliffs where the sun touched ground only at highest noon. The Apache rarely used these trails. They were too easily defended, too easily turned into traps. But now those same qualities made them valuable. "Cavalry horses can't follow here," Tarzay said, leading their small group along ledges barely wide enough for single-file passage. "Apache scouts know this place, but few will risk its spirits." Sarah understood their reluctance. The very air felt heavy with age and secrets. Ancient pictographs lined the walls, their red ochre figures, dancing in the dim light. Some showed warriors and hunt scenes, others depicted darker things, spirits and shadow creatures that seemed to move when viewed from the corner of one's eye. Their party was small, just 6 families who had chosen to follow them rather, then retreat to the reservation. Grey Mountain Woman had elected to come, saying her old bones would rather walk free paths than sit in government housing. Cloudmaker, too, had joined them, bringing his crucial medicine knowledge. The eagle feather tucked into Sarah's hair gave her strength as they navigated the treacherous path. Her moccasins, now worn to perfect softness, found purchase on stones that would have defeated her old boots. She had learned to move like the Apache, placing each foot with deliberate care, reading the rock face for signs of stability. Halfway through the valley, Tarzay's old wound began troubling him. Sarah saw him press his hand to his side, his face tightening with pain. The desperate pace of their flight had strained the barely healed injury. "We rest," she announced in Apache, her tone allowing no argument. Even Running Deer, who had surprisingly chosen to join their group, nodded agreement. Sarah examined Tarzay's wound in the dim light. The scar had reopened slightly, angry and hot to the touch. She combined medicines from both her traditions. Apache herbs to fight infection, white man's poultice to draw out heat. As she worked, Grey Mountain Woman taught her new healing songs, their soft chanting echoing strangely off the canyon walls. "Like wings," the old woman said, touching the eagle feather in Sarah's hair. "Medicine songs give power to fly above pain." Their rest was cut short by Cloudmaker's warning. He had read signs in scattered pebbles that spoke of others recently passing. "Reservation scouts," he said grimly, "making wide circle, trying to find our trail." They pushed on through deepening shadows. The canyon walls pressed closer until they had to turn sideways to pass through some gaps. Sarah found herself grateful for the times of hunger during their earlier journey that had left her lean and tough as dried meat. Night brought its own challenges. They couldn't risk fires, so they ate dried food and passed the clay water jar, carefully from hand to hand. Sarah and Tarzay shared the warrior's shield as a backrest, its surface cool against their shoulders as they kept watch together. "You could have chosen reservation," Sarah said softly. "Been safe." Tarzay's laugh was barely a breath. "Safe like cattle in pen, safe like bird in cage." He touched the eagle feather in her hair. "Rather fly free, even in shadow." Dawn found them nearing the valley's end, where the cliffs opened into high mountain meadows. But as they rounded the final bend, Tarzay froze. There, scratched fresh into the rock face, was a sign they all recognized, the mark of Whitehorse, the most famous of the reservation scouts. "He reads sign better than me," Tarzay admitted. "Knows we must come this way." Sarah felt the weight of all their lives pressing on this moment. Then she remembered something from her earliest days with Tarzay. "The bone whistle," she said. "You taught me how scouts signal. Could we?" His smile was fierce and proud. Apache wisdom with white. Woman's clever mind, yes. They laid their trap with the precision of people who understood both pursuer and pursued. When Whitehorse and his scouts arrived, they found signs of a group moving east toward the high passes. Only much later would they realize the truth, that Sarah and Tarzay's group had doubled back through the valley's shadows, using the bone whistle's signals to guide them safely through the darkness. The eagle feather stayed in Sarah's hair, a reminder that courage sometimes meant finding new ways to fly. The ancient petroglyph wall stood as a silent witness, its weathered surface depicting centuries of human struggles. Sarah traced the spiral patterns with trembling fingers as she caught her breath. Behind her, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Horses' hooves on stone, men's voices carried on the dawn wind. They had almost made it. The high country lay just beyond this sacred site, its peaks promising sanctuary. But Tarzay's wound had reopened during their flight, leaving a trail of blood that even a child could follow. Now they found themselves cornered at this ancient place of power, where countless generations of Apache had come to pray and seek guidance. "Here," Tarzay said, his voice tight with pain. "We make stand here. Sacred ground." Lieutenant Barrett's voice carried up from below. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is your last chance. Surrender now. Return to civilization. No one needs to die today." Sarah exchanged glances with Grey Mountain Woman, who had refused to leave them despite the danger. The old woman's eyes were fierce with determination. Cloudmaker crouched nearby, his medicine bag ready. "They still think you're my prisoner," Sarah called back, "that I need rescue." She switched to Apache, speaking to their small band. "Perhaps we can use their blindness." Running Deer, who had proven his loyalty during their flight, nodded grimly. "They see only what they expect to see." Sarah stood, moving into view above the cliff face. She had deliberately dressed in her old clothes, the worn calico dress she'd kept from her cabin days. The silver hair comb caught the morning light as she pulled it from her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders. "Lieutenant Barrett," she called, "will you hear me?" "Mrs. Mitchell." His relief was evident. "Are you hurt?" "I'm exactly where I choose to be." She kept her voice steady. "There's something you need to see." While she held their attention, Taze and the others moved quietly into position. Sarah withdrew her notebook, its pages filled with two languages, two kinds of wisdom joined together. "You think you're rescuing me from savages," she continued. "But look." She held up the warrior's shield with its combined symbols. "Look at what we've built here, what we can all build together. Ma'am, they've clearly confused you. Mrs. Henderson." "He told us Mrs. Henderson sees only what fear shows her." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "But I see truth. My husband is a bridge between worlds. We all can be." Movement below, soldiers shifting uncomfortably. Sarah caught glimpses of Apache scouts among them, their faces unreadable. She switched to Apache, speaking directly to them. "Brothers, you know this place. These petroglyphs tell our story, all our stories, of change and survival, of finding new paths when old ones close." Whitehorse himself stepped forward. "Woman speaks truth about stories," he said in English. "My grandfather made marks on this wall, spoke of time when people must choose between war and wisdom." Barrett's frustration showed. "This is absurd. We have orders." "Your orders are based on fear," Sarah interrupted. "Fear of what you don't understand." She touched the eagle feather still in her hair. "But understanding is possible. Look at what we've created." She gestured to Cloudmaker, who began a healing song. Grey Mountain Woman's voice joined his, then others. The ancient music rose up the cliff face, echoing off the petroglyphs. "Your wife knows our songs now," Whitehorse said to Taze. "Learns our medicine, yet keeps her own wisdom too." He turned to Barrett. "Lieutenant, I cannot track these people anymore. They walk in beauty." Sarah descended carefully, helping Taze down despite his pride. Their small band followed, not surrendering, but choosing to stand their ground with dignity. "You see savages," Sarah told Barrett. "I see people who taught me to read the stars, to heal with the earth's medicine, to find water in desert. Stone. My husband is a scout, a leader, a man of peace. We've built something here that could show the way forward for all of us." Barrett looked uncertain now. The Apache scouts had moved to stand with Whitehorse, their loyalty to military orders visibly wavering. "The territory's changing," Sarah continued. "We can change with it, learn from each other, or we can keep fighting until nothing remains." But bitterness. Taze straightened despite his wound. "My father chose war," he said clearly in English. "I choose different path, harder path, path that leads forward, not in circles." The ancient petroglyphs seemed to pulse with power in the rising sun. Generations of human stories carved in stone, watching this newest chapter unfold. Sarah held the warrior's shield before her, not as a weapon, but as proof of what was possible when people chose understanding over fear. Barrett looked from the shield to the petroglyphs, to the mixed group before him. His orders suddenly seemed very far away, very small against the weight of what he witnessed. A mixed-blood child's cradle board hung from Sarah's shoulder as she worked in the expanded garden, its intricate beadwork catching the morning sun. The infant inside, her daughter, slept peacefully, unaware that her very existence represented a bridge between worlds. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at the petroglyph wall. What could have ended in bloodshed had instead spawned something unprecedented. Lieutenant Barrett, moved by what he'd witnessed, had become an unexpected ally. His reports to his superiors spoke of the potential for a different kind of peace. The garden itself told the story of their evolution. Sarah's notebook had grown thick with successful experiments. Apache planting methods enriched by European crop rotation, traditional medicines growing alongside introduced herbs. The land seemed to approve of this blending, offering up abundant harvests. "The corn grows strong," Taze said, joining her. His wound had finally healed clean, leaving only a scar that their daughter loved to touch with tiny fingers. Like our people, their settlement had become something unique in the territory. After Barrett's intervention, they'd been granted an unofficial autonomy, not a reservation, but a kind of prototype community. Apache families who preferred traditional ways lived alongside a handful of white settlers who had chosen to learn the old wisdom. Mrs. Henderson had even visited once, her rigid certainty cracking when she saw the reality of their life. She'd left with a bag of healing herbs and perhaps a seed of understanding planted in her heart. "Grey Mountain Woman says Emily has the gift," Sarah said, using their daughter's Apache name that meant dawn light. "She sees how the baby watches." "When medicines are prepared," Taze smiled. "Two kinds of healing in her blood, two kinds of wisdom in her spirit." He touched the cradleboard's beadwork, patterns that told stories of both their heritages. Their home had become a place of learning. Cloudmaker taught traditional medicine, while Sarah contributed her knowledge of Western healing. Young Apache warriors learned to read and write English, while white settlers' children learned to move silently through the desert and read its signs. The warrior's shield hung in a place of honor, its surface now bearing the marks of their joined lives. Beside it, the clay water jar still held its place of importance, carrying water for ceremonies that borrowed from both traditions. Jim Hawkins had settled nearby, his son apprenticing with Cloudmaker in the healing ways. Other families had followed, some Apache, some white, all drawn by the possibility of a different way of living. "Running Deer says more come soon," Taze reported. "Apache bands from north, settlers from east, all hear story of place where peace grows like corn in good soil." Sarah adjusted Emily's cradleboard, thinking of the future they were building. "Peace was always possible," she said. "People just needed to see it growing to believe in it." Their daughter stirred, opening eyes that held hints of both her heritages. Sarah sang her back to sleep with a lullaby that melded Apache melody with English words. Another bridge, built with love and patience. Whitehorse had become a frequent visitor, no longer tracking them, but learning from them. He'd been the first to recognize that their way offered hope for his people's future, preservation of essential traditions, while adapting to inevitable change. "My grandfather's marks on stone," he'd said, touching the petroglyphs. "They speak of such a time when wisdom would wear two faces, walk in two ways, but lead to one truth." The truth, Sarah had learned, was that strength could flow both ways across a bridge. Their settlement proved it daily, Apache wisdom making settlers more attuned to the land, Western knowledge helping the people adapt without losing their core identity. Emily's cradleboard symbolized this union perfectly. Its traditional frame held beadwork that told both her parents' stories. The prayers woven into its design came from two spiritual traditions, offering double protection. Even her names, one from each world, spoke of the power of embracing both paths. "Barrett returns tomorrow," Taze reminded her. "Brings news from Washington." Sarah nodded, unworried. Whatever came, they had built something too valuable to be easily dismissed. Their success spoke louder than any argument. Their growing community proved the possibility of their vision. "Let them come," she said, touching the eagle feather she still wore. "We'll show them how peace takes root when planted in understanding." Around them, the garden flourished in its unique way. European rose curving into Apache spirals, plants from both worlds supporting each other's growth. Like the people who tended it, the garden had found strength in unity, beauty in diversity, and wisdom in walking two paths as one. The sunrise blessing bundle caught the first rays of dawn, its contents assembled with care. Sage from Sarah's garden, cedar from Taze's sacred places, threads from her wedding dress woven with strands of his warrior's sash. Like everything in their lives now, it represented the best of both worlds joined in harmony. 5 years had passed since Sarah first found a wounded warrior in her lean-to. Now she stood on the porch of their new home, built where the desert met the mountains. The construction itself told their story, traditional Apache design adapted with selected elements of Western architecture, creating something both innovative and respectful of the old ways. Emily played nearby, her laughter carrying on the morning breeze as she helped her father tend their expanded garden. At 5, she moved effortlessly between both cultures, as comfortable reciting Bible verses as she was singing Apache medicine. Songs Her cradle board, now too small for her, hung preserved beside the warrior's shield and clay water jar, treasured symbols of their journey. "Mother," Emily called in Apache, then switched to English, "Father says the new people are coming today." Sarah smiled at her daughter's natural blending of languages. The new people were another group of families, both Apache and white, drawn by stories of their thriving community. What had begun as a desperate experiment had grown into a model of possibility. Taze joined her on the porch, touching the blessing bundle. "Good signs today," he said. "Clear sky, eagle flying, wind from sacred mountains." Lieutenant Barrett, now Indian Affairs Agent Barrett, would be arriving too, bringing official recognition of their settlement's unique status. His reports had gradually convinced Washington that their way offered a better path than forced reservations or endless conflict. Sarah touched her father's gold watch, still keeping time after all these years. She thought of the young widow she'd been, how little she'd understood about the vastness of human possibility. The watch had once represented her connection to civilization. Now it was simply one thread in a richer tapestry. "Grey Mountain Woman says Emily shows strong healing gifts," Taze said proudly. "Sees with both kinds of medicine eyes." Their daughter was growing up in a world they had helped create, one where wisdom was measured not by its origin, but by its truth. The settlement school taught reading and writing alongside desert survival and traditional knowledge. There, Healing Lodge combined practices from both cultures, drawing people from across the territory. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and creosote, of cooking fires and brewing coffee. Voices rose in morning prayers, some in Apache, some in English, all reaching for the same sky. Sarah thought of Mrs. Henderson's recent letter, apologizing for her past judgment, asking to visit again and learn more about their medicines. "Time turns like seasons," Taze said, reading her thoughts as he often did now. "Fear becomes understanding, if given chance to grow." Sarah touched the eagle feather she still wore, its strength undiminished. "We gave it more than a chance," she replied. "We gave it a place to take root." Their legacy was all around them, in the thriving gardens, in the faces of children from both worlds playing together, in the daily proof that different peoples could do more than just coexist. They could flourish together, each making the other stronger. Emily brought them the clay water jar, now used in ceremonies that honored both their traditions. Together, they blessed the morning as they always did, with Apache prayers and Christian verses, with old wisdom and new understanding. Their words rose to meet the dawn, carrying the promise of a future that knew no boundaries except those of the human heart. The sun climbed higher, painting the cliffs gold, just as it had that morning when a lonely widow first chose mercy over fear, and a wounded warrior first offered trust instead of hatred. Their love had grown like desert flowers after rain, defying expectations, beautiful in its uniqueness, stronger for the challenges it had overcome. They were no longer just Sarah and Taze, but something more, proof that the human spirit could bridge any divide when guided by wisdom and love. Their story would be told in both languages, marked in petroglyphs and written in books, a testament to the power of choosing understanding over fear, growth over stagnation, and love over prejudice. The sunrise blessing bundle swayed gently in the morning breeze, scattering light like precious seeds into the promising day.